The sequence of events that carried us from boogie woogie to Facebook begins with the Cold War and the research efforts spawned in response to the nuclear threat. The Valley Committee and the confluence of the computer and networking research that followed propelled us forward, spending uncounted billions of dollars in pursuit of advanced technology. There is no doubt that some of this was overreaction and there was much waste, but that Cold War era spending fostered useful spin-offs in the form of domestic applications for powerful time sharing and networking. ARPANET and the research dollars had a profound influence on everything that followed. The part that hasn't been told is the carry-through of ARPA research into the civilian world that brought forth profound changes to business and society. These changes would not have happened, or might have happened very differently, without the efforts of some very innovative entrepreneurs. ARPANET, with its close-held access and highly restrictive acceptable uses policies, played little role in the day-to-day life of those outside of the military and academia. Ordinary businesses and their customers, whose tax dollars were being used to fund these efforts, received little benefit and were scarcely aware of its existence. Slide 39. When timeshare rolled out a relatively inexpensive time-sharing service on relatively inexpensive computers built for that market, many businesses began to appreciate the value, and the concept we would later call software as a service began to emerge. When TimeNet began offering worldwide networking services, the business community welcomed these new capabilities. Despite the relatively low cost, these services were still fairly expensive, but they were widely available to businesses and changed how the world saw computing and communications. The AT&T breakup in 1984, the rise of microcomputers throughout the 1980s, and finally the emergence of the commercial internet in 1992 broke down the cost barriers and made computers and networking available to everyone. The assault by Rick Adams and his merry band of rebels on the ANS empire, their end-run around the establishment, first with the Kicks and then via May East, blunted attempts by the old empire to retain control over the internet. May East busted the internet loose from the restrictive acceptable usage policies of the NSF and the telephony-style settlement charges that had been assumed by the big carriers who were going to control the internet. This freed the internet to become the wide-open, Wild West, anything-goes environment we know today. The commercially built MFS data backbone took precedence over the taxpayer-funded NSF backbone and rendered ANS's ambitions moot. Thanks to the battle these people fought, no one single entity owns or controls the internet today. Slide 40. In 1992, recognizing that the traditional value-added networking model was not suited to the demands of a world that had fully embraced TCP/IP and Ethernet, a group of people left TimeNet to create MFS DataNet. DataNet then created May East in conjunction with Rick Adams and UUNet, replaced the Kicks, and soon May East was carrying over 90% of the entire world's internet traffic. MFS then negotiated a deal whereby the MFS national ATM backbone could carry the traffic of the emerging internet. This rendered the taxpayer-funded ANS backbone virtually irrelevant, especially since ANS still insisted on controlling commercial usage of their backbone. The internet grew rapidly until MFS and UUNet agreed to join forces. MFS acquired UUNet in 1996, setting off a chain of dominoes that engulfed the industry. WorldCom bought MFS weeks after the UUNet acquisition, then bought MCI, only to collapse while trying to buy Sprint. Meanwhile, the R-Box had been trying to reassemble the remains of Ma Bell and put Humpty Dumpty back together again. As they're doing so, AT&T itself collapsed in bankruptcy and was acquired by SBC. A highly relevant tangent, which I addressed in my previous book, Securing the Network, is the role of Enron in the emergence of streaming media and video on demand. That is a story that deserves its own presentation. History has not treated Enron kindly, perhaps for good reasons, but Enron's broadband communications company, EBS, was not involved in the corporate machinations and financial misdealings that led to Enron's downfall. There were many good people who worked at ABS, and they deserve to be remembered for their innovations and especially for the creation of advanced media distribution platforms. Demonstrated, sold, and up and running by the end of 2000, they built the powerful streaming services that Netflix, Hulu, and a long list of others use today. Another important factor is the involvement of the entrenched, monopoly-minded corporations that have risen to control Internet access. In the 1990s, we had the unbundling of local telephone loops, and for a time, competition to the local exchange carriers arose. These companies were called Competitive Local Exchange Carriers, or CLECs, and offered connectivity in direct competition to SBC and the other baby bells, as well as the big cable companies. These monopoly-minded companies did not take kindly to the upstarts intruding on what they considered rightfully their domain, and fought back, eventually killing the CLECs. With the collapse of the CLECs in the early 2000s, the remains of Ma Bell and the big cable operators swooped in and captured what is effectively today a monopoly on subscriber access and have fought furiously to block any competition. In much of the U.S. today, if you live in an area served by AT&T, then AT&T may in fact be the only ISP you can get. If you live in an area controlled by Comcast, then Comcast may be the only service you can get. Charter Spectrum and a few others have their areas too. Some areas are served by both a telephone giant and a cable giant, and you can freely choose between these two, which is really no choice at all. Very few places have an independent third alternative to the telco and cable companies, and where a serious competitor has tried to enter, such as Google Fiber, the monopoly-minded ISPs have fought tooth and nail to block them.